All right, we'll say a good morning, a Freilich and Shushan Purim, and let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar, Stephen Teri Czinn, for dedicating all of his Shumer and Drushos this month in memory of Dr. Harry Kahn, Tzvi Hirsh, ben Yosef HaKohen. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all of his Shumer and Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah ben Zechariah and Dinah bas Pesach. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Moshe Dovid Chana Artman, the commemoration of the 23rd yahrzeit of Moshe Dovid's father today, Phishel Berel ben Yitzchak Gershon, Zechariah. And thank Dr. Ron Gartenhaus for dedicating the week of learning in the zechus refuah sheleimah for Natan ben Rivka. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Gregg Rena Trestman for dedicating the commemoration of the yahrzeit of Rena's mother, Dvora bas Avraham Aaron Wolasky, we hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos Havin Aliyah and the families in Achamar. Also with that, we have a lot to do today, Meretz Hashem. Incredible amount to do today. First off, to those to our Chevron on Zoom, Baruch Hashem from Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. I see Rabbi David is here. For him, it's Purim. Michael, I don't know, Michael, what they do in Efrat. Is it? I'm assuming it's Yudalid and not Tesvav. But good. It's Reb Tzvi over here. Also, I'm assuming Yudalid and not Tesvav. Okay, Baruch Hashem. Beautiful. Beautiful. Chevron, with that, let us begin. Beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Mem Dalid, but we are picking up 13 lines up from the bottom on Mem Beis and Today's daf is Mem Dalid 44. We are picking up on Mem Gimel and Mem Beis 13 lines up from the bottom at Mesvei. Remember again, Rav Chiston yesterday's daf introduced us to the fascinating idea that if a Kohen has a father, every Kohen has a father, but in this case, the Kohen's father, Niktam Rosho, his head was cut off, he was decapitated. So Rav Chiston wanted to suggest that halacha l'maisa, the Kohen cannot become tamei for his father, because the halacha is le'aviv. And le'aviv teaches me that a son can only become tamei for his father if the father is in a complete state. So the Gemara says, Meiser, raising a kasha, lo yitama. So we'll say over here, the pasuk is talking about the ability of a Kohen to become tamei for his sister. So lahu metami, become tamei for his sister, ve'en metami le'vara. But he cannot become tamei ultimately again for her limbs. For her limbs. So the Gemara is lefi she'ina metami le'ever min achai shel aviv. Same way that he cannot become tamei for a limb removed from his father. Aval machs, in other words, from his living father. Aval machs shua etzem kiseora. But halacha l'maisa, he would be permitted to become tamei for an etzem, for a bone fragment the size of a barley corn. My machsir al etzem kiseora. We'll say, what does that mean? What does that mean that he can be machsir etzem kiseora? Lavla memra di mechser parta lo. So we'll say, does that not mean that halacha l'maisa? If you take a look at the rush for just a moment, this is the rush in the wide lines, 4 lines in. Aval machsir etzem kiseora kilomar afa pishin yachol itamei lo le'ivr velo cha'adarsha mikomokom im nitma kvar la'aviv machsir al etzem kiseora shel aviv l'kovro. So the Gemara, interestingly enough, what it sounds like it's saying over here is if he's already tamei for his father, he would be permitted to go ahead and further become tamei is the wrong word, but it'd be permitted then to go back and retrieve a bone fragment, since he was already tamei for his father. So the Rush says, "My machzor lav dafka chaser porta b'shashenitma la'aviv v'chaser meno etzem lisora." So say, "B'pashos, doesn't that sound like the case over here is he became tamei for his father? He became tamei for his father. In other words, and the father's body was deficient. Once the father's body was deficient, he could also go ahead and become tamei for the bone fragment." Lo hahi Rabbi Yehuda. Another Gemara says, no, that's actually reflective of the view of Rabbi Yehuda. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? Disanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, mitame, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, lo mitame, mitame lavera. Pasuk says, lo yitama, for a sister he can become tamei, but he does not become tamei for limbs. She'ena mitame al iver min hachai shel aviv. He cannot become tamei for a limb that was removed from his father while the father is alive. But he can become tamei for the limb of his father's corpse. Says the Gemara Vatanya Rav Kana, Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov. Say we learned that halacha l'maisa again. Rav Kana, Rabbi Lazar ben Yaakov says law mitamei ve'enu mitamei leivarim. That ultimately again he become tamei for her, but not for limbs. Prat lekizayis minames. This comes to exclude a kizayis from the corpse, or kizayis netzel. So we'll say we're going to talk about netzel as well. Netzel is literally decomposing flesh. umole tarvad rekev. And Rabbi say it's been a little while since we've seen this, but a ladle full of corpse dust. It's always a party. It's always a party when you've got nekev and tarvad. Good. Yochol lo yitam l'shedra gulgolas. So we'll say. So therefore, it comes to exclude. You cannot become tamei for these items. So the Gemara says as follows: Prantik gizais menameis gizais netzel umole tarvad rekev. Yochol lo yitam l'shedra ulagulgolas ularov binyana ularov minyana. See, I thought that so too. You cannot become tamei for Shedra's spinal cord, Gogolus the spine, Ulurov Binyana, Ulurov Minyana, to the majority of the skeletal frame or to the majority of the number of bones, Ksiv Va'amarta Aleim. Therefore the Pasuk says, you shall say unto them, Hosif Lecha Kosov Tuma Achares. The Torah adds on over here, ultimately, again, additional forms of tumah that one is permitted. Also remember, again, we're talking about over here cases in which a Kohen is permitted to become tamei. So not only could he become tamei for an intact corpse, but he can become tamei for all of these, what we'll call it, significant units as well. Top of Mem Dalid, Yachol lo yitamei l'shedra ulagulgoles ularov binyana ularov minyano shalacherim. I Rabbi say you might have thought that halacha l'maisa, as much as he's permitted for his relative to become tamei for these things. When it comes to someone else, if there's a spinal cord, a skull, the majority of the skeletal frame, the majority of bones of others, meaning non-relatives, ultimately perhaps you would think that you are not permitted to go ahead and become tamei for them. So the Gemara says, Amrit ma'achosa miyuchedes shebegufa talui bo. So we'll say, what's unique about sister? Right? What's unique about the sister is it's incumbent upon her brother, the Kohen, whereas we'll say, whenever the Torah gives us a license for the Kohen to become tamei to someone, why is that? That's because that person's burial is dependent on the Kohen. So what's unique about sister? What's unique about sister is her burial is dependent upon her brother, and therefore ultimately, again, he's permitted to become tamei for the spinal cord, for the skull, for the majority of the skeletal frame, the majority of the number of bones. So af kol shegufo talui bo mitame l'shedra ulagulgoles ularov binyano ularov minyano. So too, I will say any person who is dependent on the Kohen for burial. What's an example of a person who's dependent on the Kohen for burial? Meis mitzvah, for example. Salach l'maisa, if you have these things intact, the spinal cord, the skull, the majority of the skeletal frame, the majority of bones, ultimately, again, a Kohen would be permitted to go ahead and become tamei for them as well. To which the Gemara says, you're right, but ahinami Rabbi Hudahi. Ultimately, this too is reflective of the view of Rabbi Huda. The Rav do Amar ki haytana, and Rav holds like someone else. What does Rav hold like? The following Tana: the Sanya Ma'aseh Shemeis Aviv Shrabi Yitzchak Beginzak. It was a very interesting story. One time it happened that the father of Rabbi Yitzchak died in Ginzak, and Ginzak is a place. So what happened? Ubo va'odihu uli achar shalosh shanim. And I will say what happened. They came and they only told Rabbi Yitzchak after 3 years. I will say it's so fascinating because for us contemporarily, it's we get information so quickly that the notion of not hearing about something for some extended amount of time is so foreign and alien to us. But here, Rabbi Yitzchak's father died. He died in some faraway place. Rabbi Yitzchak does not hear about it for 3 years. Then I will say, now there's an important piece of the story, which is Rabbi Yitzchak is a Kohen. So we'll say, and he came and he asked the Shaila to Rabbi Yoshua ben Elisha and the 4 Zakinim. And I will say, now what's the Shaila that he's asking? The Shaila that he's asking is Rabbi Yitzchak wants to relocate his father's grave. So what he wants to do is he wants to retrieve the remains of his father and transport them to a family plot. So he comes and he asks the Shaila, am I allowed to do that? And listen to this, so we'll say, Va'amru, they said to him, La'aviv, Bisman shu shalim v'lo bisman shu chaser. They said to Rabbi Yitzchak, you can't do it. Why? Because the pasuk says la'aviv. A Kohen is permitted to become tamei for his father. I will say, what's the drasha from aviv? He's only permitted to become tamei to his father when the corpse is intact and not when it's not. And I will say, b'pashtos, after 3 years, after having passed away, the corpse is no longer intact. So I will say, how do we paskin? Because it's actually quite an interesting halacha, right? Because we're all familiar. Obviously, this is talking about a regular kohen, not a kohen gadol, right? Because kohen gadol doesn't become tamei for anyone, right? So the shaila is again, besides for a mitzvah, right? So what about for a regular kohen? We know that he has a license to become tamei for 7 close relatives, right? A mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, spouse. So we'll say, do we accept this drasha of la'aviv or not? So let's listen to this. Set to the Shulchan Aruch. Went to the Shulchan Aruch in Yeredeya, Simin Shin Ayin Dalid Siftes. It's the last sif. Listen to this. Eina koin metame le'ever min achai me'aviv, v'lo le'etzem me'atzamos aviv. We'll say the halacha is that a kohen, let's say kohen is a father. Let's say the father had a limb that was amputated. Now we'll say the halacha is that you have to bury amputated limbs. So a kohen cannot become tamei for his father's amputated limb. This is talking about a limb taken from his father while he's still living. Nor could a kohen become tamei for a bone from his father. So we'll say if one is collecting atzamos, we'll say likut atzamos means the concept of collecting remains in order to rebury them somewhere else. Afa pisha shedra kayemes chasem el koshu afilu munach etzlo eina metamilo she'ena metame elo l'shalim. Rabbi say, isn't this incredible? So we pass halacha l'mais like this drasha. A kohen is only permitted to become tamei to his father for his father. Ultimately, when the body is intact. Now the Shulchan Aruch Azin, he says v'yishom omer tahani mili kishachasur la'achamisa avalim chaser meno ever b'chayav umeis mitame lo afa pi she'eno shalem. So Rabbi says this is very interesting. So the Shulchan Aruch then says, but by the way, this concept that a kohen could only become tamei for his father if the body is intact, this is only if the body became deficient after death. But ultimately, again, let's say you have a case, I have a kohen who has a father, the father had a limb amputated while the father's alive. So now the father dies, so according to the first opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, a kohen cannot become tamei for his father under those circumstances. According to the second opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the accepted opinion, he can. Because essentially, I will say, what's the definition of shaleim? What's the definition of shaleim? Shaleim is how you die. Right? The state of the body at the time of death. So that's the state when intact that a kohen is permitted. Any deficiency that happens after death, the kohen would not be permitted to become tamei for his father. It's really actually quite interesting, I will say, which is a good musar also. The definition of shleimus is the state that you reach when you die. That's the state when you reach when you die. I will say, see, my whole life, right? I have the opportunity to do things, the opportunity to work on things. The only time that my essence is locked in is at the time of death. That's when I'm shalim, right? What I am at the time of my death, that's the state of shleimus I've reached in this world. Incredible. Mishnah. Shlosha minin asurin bin Nazir. We'll say there are 3 different things that are asur for a Nazir. What are the 3 different things? Here they are. Hatuma v'taglachas v'yotzi min hagefen. Right? So this tuma means becoming tamei, right? Exposed to the dead. Taglachas, hair cutting. Yotzi min hagefen. Wine or grape derivatives. Fine. So we'll say, so now what we're going to do actually for this entire sugya is we're going to compare all of these different things one to the other. So watch this. Chomer betuma. So, let's say, by the way, just before I go on, I'll just mention one very interesting Ramah in this, and I'm sorry, just in the previous sugya. The Ramah says, so we'll say, so remember, I'm sorry, we have a little bit of time, so I can do this. So we'll say, listen to this. So remember, Machlokes in the Shulchan Aruch. First opinion in the Shulchan Aruch said, a kohen can only become tamei for his father when the body is fully intact. What's the definition of fully intact? What's the definition? Literally, fully intact literally means fully intact. The second opinion, Yish Omrim, says no, the definition of fully intact is whatever the state of the body is at the time of death. We'll say, what's the nafkamina? Practical difference? An amputee. an amputee, right? Let's say the father of the Kohen had a limb amputated while he was alive. According to the first opinion in the Shulchan Aruch, that's called chaser, and a Kohen literally would not be able to become tamei for him. According to the second opinion, that's called shaleimah, because shaleimah is right, because shaleimah is determined at the time of death. The Ramah, this is actually fascinating, quotes a Yesh Omrim who says, she'eno metame laharug de mikri chaser, that if the Kohen's father was killed, not died of natural causes, but was killed, that ultimately, again, that's called chaser. So I will say, because bepashtos, right, any act of murder, right, any act of murder is going to cause some deficiency in the body. So therefore the Yesh Omrim say that halacha l'maisa, any time the Kohen's father is killed, ultimately that's called chaser. And the Ramah says nachon lahachmir. It's fascinating. The Ramah says it's appropriate to be machmir in this. So I say I don't know. I didn't have a chance last night to go ahead and look a little bit more into this to see about how we paskin like contemporarily, because unfortunately, right, this is a Lamaisa case for Klal Yisrael, right? Throughout the history of Klal Yisrael. So ultimately, again, but it's just fascinating that you have this Ramah that says anytime someone is murdered, by definition, that's chaser, and the Kohen would not be permitted to be matami for his father. Okay, so just bear in mind this machlok. So according to the Mechaber, we're going to pass like the second opinion that the definition of shalem is established at the time of death. Incredible. Says the Mishnah. Back to the Mishnah again, sorry. Shlosha minim asura min Nazir. Both say there are three things that are asur by a Nazir. What are they? Hatuma, v'hataglachas, v'yotzi min hagefen. So a Nazir can't become tamei, a Nazir can't get a haircut, and a Nazir cannot partake of grape derivatives. So I will say grape derivatives because remember again we've established what is it? It's the grape skin, it's the grape seeds, it's the grape flesh, right? It's new grapes, moist grapes, dry grapes, wine, anything and everything that comes from the grape. Good. So now the Mishnah says, listen to this. Chomer betuma ubetaglachas. There is a chumrah, so to speak, a stringency with tuma and taglachas, with tuma and hair cutting, mi biyotze min hagefen, over the grape derivatives. Why? Shatuma v'taglachas sosrin, because we're supposed to listen to this. If a Kohen becomes tamei, or for that matter, a Kohen cuts his hair. Now also we're going to see taglachas, by the way. Taglachas is whether or not the Nazir cuts his hair, or what? Someone else cuts his hair. Right? One of the fascinating ideas. It doesn't really matter. But both by Tumah and Taglachas, Sosrin. I will say they both go ahead and literally destroy the days that have been counted up until now. Now we're going to qualify that in just a moment. Bayotzi min hagefen eino soser. So I will say this is really something very interesting to think about. Right? If a Nazir becomes tamei, so let's go through these one by one. Nazir becomes tamei, so we'll say what happens to, right? Nazir goes into a cemetery. What happens to the days of his Nazirus that he's observed up until this point? Starts all over again. So Shavosai means he loses those days. Same thing with hair cutting. What happens if a Nazir goes ahead and cuts his hair? What's the halacha? So this is going to be a bit more nuanced because lav dafka that he goes ahead and loses all of the days. We're going to see he just loses some amount of days. But for our purposes right now, he's got to reobserve the days. Interestingly enough, this stands in contradistinction to drinking wine. What happens if a Nazir drinks wine? I will say, what's the halacha? He's in violation of an Isser Deoraisa, which means he'll get Malchus, but doesn't lose days. So that's what's fascinating over here. Enos Sosa means he doesn't lose days, but he's in violation ultimately of an Isser Deoraisa. So we'll say, so therefore, that's the Chumrah that Tuma and Taglachas have over grapes. On the flip side, Chomer biyotzi min hagefen min betuma taglachas, the distinction of, say, the Chumrah that grape derivatives have over Tuma and Taglachas is what? Shayotzi min hagefen lo hoter michlalo. Supposed to listen to this. When it comes to grape derivatives, there is no case in which grape consumption is mutter. Right? Or as I was saying, for Nazir, there's no case where, because of circumstances, he's allowed to eat grapes or drink wine. Right? But interestingly enough, but there are cases of permitted tumah and permitted hair cutting. Where is the case of permitted tumah and permitted hair cutting? Listen to this. Petaglachas mitzvah. I will say, what's the case of permitted hair cutting? where the Nazir becomes a mitzorah. If the Nazir becomes a mitzorah, part of the concluding ritual for tzaras is shaving of the hair. So therefore, again, if a Nazir becomes a mitzorah, he has an obligation to shave his head, right? Uber meis mitzvah. What about tumah? So tumah ultimately again becomes a mitzvah when? In the case of meis mitzvah. So both sides, so fascinating, right? So there is no case for a Nazir where grape or wine consumption is ever permitted. Right? There's no such thing as like, it's a mitzvah, therefore he's going to do it. Yet, interestingly enough, there is a case where ultimately tumah becomes permitted, i.e. meis mitzvah, taglachas becomes permitted, i.e. mitzorah. Incredible. Last piece. The chomer betuma mi betaglachas, and I both say there is a chumrah that tumah has over haircutting. How so? Here we go. Shatuma so seres es hakol. I both say if a nazir becomes tamei, what does he lose? The entire count. And yet interestingly enough, v'chayavin aleh carbon, and you have to bring a carbon for tumah. We're going to talk about that's actually our next mishnah. V'taglachas ino soseres el shloshim. But I will say, what's the halacha if a nazir cuts his hair? What's the halacha if a nazir cuts his hair? He only loses what? 30 days. So I will say the whole chap with hair cutting is you lose time, but you only lose up to 30 days. Because again, what do we need by the haircut? What do we need by the hair? Growth. We need 30 days of growth. So you could only, so in other words, your cap, the ceiling is 30 days. And ultimately, again, you're not chayav a carbon if you cut your hair. Good. So I will say, so really fascinating Mishnah. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, V'tumah lo tusra miklala, V'tumah lo tusra miklala, kavachomer miyayin. So I'll say, so remember again, one of the things that we mentioned in the Mishnah, so I'll say, so now what we're going to do for the rest of this, so again, it's really very interesting, is we're going to go back and forth comparing these items one to the other, these three different restrictions. So one of the things we said in the Mishnah was that what was unique about Tumah is that it's Hutra Michlala, which means even though a Nazir is prohibited to become Tameh, there is a case where Nazir is permitted to become Tameh. What's the case where Nazir is permitted to become Tameh? What's the case? Meis mitzvah. Good. So the Tumah, lo tusra miklala, kavchor miyayin. So we'll say, so the truth is we should say that you can't become Tameh. There's no case of Pameh Tumah should be a kalachomer from wine. How so? Uma yayin she'eno soser lo hoter michlalo. So we'll say wine. If a Nazir drinks wine, he doesn't lose any of his previous count. He's just in violation of an Isur Daraisa, right? And yet there's no permitted case of wine. So ultimately, Tumah sheso seres ino din shlo tusra michlala. So Tumah, which does destroy the count up until now. Certainly, again, there should be no permitted case. So we'll say it's a pretty solid kavachomer. Talmud lomar lo aviv uli imo lo yitama. Therefore, we'll say the pasuk says, for his father and his mother, he shall not become tamei. Lo aviv uli imo lo yitama teaches us he shouldn't become tamei for his parents. Aval metame hula meis mitzvah, but he can become tamei ultimately again for a meis mitzvah. So we'll say it's essentially what the Gemara answers is what? It's a drasha. It's a drasha. Einachinami. It's a good kavachomer, a very solid kavachomer to teach me that perhaps there should be no permitted case of tumah, but Lamaisa it's a drasha and a pasuk. Good. V'yayin, yoser, yutar, michlalo. So we'll say we should say that wine ultimately again should become permitted. V'yayin, yoser, michlalo. Wine ultimately again should become permitted in the case of a mitzvah. I will say, now, what would be the case of wine becoming? This is very shaykh, right? It's halacha l'maisa, right? When should wine become permitted for a mitzvah? Right? Pesach, Kiddush, right? You fill in the blank. In other words, anytime. So we should say that wine should become permitted b'makom mitzvah. Kavachomer mituma, she kavachomer from tuma. How so? Uma tuma shiso seres chutra michlala. So tuma, which ultimately, if Nazir becomes tamei, loses his entire count. Yet tuma is permitted in the case of a mitzvah. Yayin she'eno soser eno din shiyutar michlala. So wine ultimately again, which is not soser, right? Wine which does not go ahead and lose the count. Certainly again, it should become permitted. Amrakra, Pasuk first white line, miyayin v'sheichar yazir. So Pasuk says from yayin and sheichar he has to abstain. Lesser yayin mitzvah ki yayin reshus. And from the drasha of that Pasuk we say that permitted wine, I should say mitzvah wine, is going to be prohibited just like regular wine. Okay? V'yayin yistres hakol kavchom l'tumah. We should second wide line. We should say that wine consumption should destroy the entire count of the Nazir, and it should be a kavachomer from Tumah. How so? Ma Tumah shehutra michlala, so Sarah says hakol. Tumah, which ultimately, again, I will say, if a Nazir becomes Tameh, he loses everything. So Yayin, Shalohot, and yet, again, Tumah, right? Tumah has a permitted case, right? Tumah is permitted b'makom mitzvah, yet when a Nazir becomes Tameh, he loses his entire count. Yayin, Shalohotra michlalo, lo koshik. So certainly wine, I will say, but wine is not permitted. If a Nazir drinks wine, he should lose the entire count as well. To which the Gemara says, Kol shekin sheyistra amakra va'yamim harishonim yiplu ki tamei nizro. So we'll say the pasuk says the earlier days that he observed will fall by the wayside. Why? Because he became tamei. What do you see from here? Tumah soseres ve'ein hayayin soser. Ultimately, only tumah destroys the count, but ultimately wine does not. So we'll say we should say that haircutting. What's the again? What did the Mishnah say? What do you lose? What do you lose when you cut your hair? Nazir, what do you lose? Up to 30 days, but no more than 30 days. But we should say that taglachas, haircutting, should go ahead and cause a person to lose everything. Kavachomer mituma. It's kavachomer from tuma. What's the kavachomer? Umak tuma shelo asu bametame kimetame. So Sarah says hakol. So let's listen to this. So by tuma, so I will say somebody who makes a Nazir tameh is not the same as a Nazir who becomes tameh himself, right? So I'll say if you take a look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi is actually right across. Rashi is umat tuma shelo asa metame kimetame shametame es hanazir eno over alav. Excuse me. Like the sneeze heard around the world. Okay, so let's listen to this. Okay, sorry. So this is actually quite fascinating. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Umat tumushlo asam etami kimetami shametami asan nazir eino over alav." I will say, if you pick up a nazir and you put him down in a cemetery. Okay, it's strange, but the Maisa, it's not asa. Right? You haven't violated anything. So we'll say, yet again, the Nazir himself, of course, who defiles himself, he becomes a Nazir. I'm sorry, that is a violation, right? The Nazir is Matame himself, ultimately, again, is in violation. Yet I will say, now watch this. So Sarah says hakol, yet by Tumah, you lose everything. Taglachas, sha'asu ba migaleach kimiskaleach. I will say, we are going to something fascinating. The halacha is that if a Nazir cuts his hair, not only is the Nazir who gets, let's say a Nazir goes to the barber, right? The barber gives the Nazir a haircut. Not only is the Nazir in violation, but what? The barber is as well. Again, we haven't learned that. We haven't not learned that fact yet. That's later on, but we're being introduced to it now. So we'll say, see the distinction over here, when it comes ultimately again, so haircutting, which ultimately again, the Isser is both on the Nazir and on the barber, should ultimately again be soser everything. In other words, we'll say, here the Kavachomer, if Tumah, which only the Nazir is chayiv, but the person who's metame the Nazir is not chayiv, and yet again, if the Nazir becomes tameh, soser akol, he destroys everything. Haircutting, where there's a prohibition both on the Nazir and on the barber, should certainly go ahead and destroy all of the days observed up until this point as well. To which the Gemara says, Amakra, Vayamim Harishonim Yiplu, Ki Tamei Nizro. So as the Pasuk says, the earlier days will fall by the wayside. Why? Because Tamei Nizro. Tumah Soseres Esakol, Vein Taglacha Soseres Esakol. So ultimately it's only Tumah which destroys all of the previous days, but hair cutting does not. Again, I will say we're just going through this whole sugya. V'Tumah Naseh Ba Metame Kimetame Kavchom Taglachas. So I will say by Tumah, we should say that the Nazir, right, who becomes Tameh, I should say the person who makes the Nazir Tameh, should be just as liable as the Nazir himself, and it should be a Kavachomer from haircutting. Umat Taglacha Sheno Soseres El Shloshim, when it comes to haircutting, all the Nazir loses is 30 days. Yet Asaba Migaleach Kimiskaleach, the barber is liable just like the Nazir. So Tumah Shi Soseres as I call Tumah, which destroys everything observed up until that point. Eino din shenase ba mitame kimitame. Ultimately, again, halacha lemaisa. we should say that the person who became Tameh is just like the Nazir should become Tameh, should be just like the person who made the Nazir Tameh should be just as liable as the Nazir himself. Amakra, V'time Rosh Nizro. L'mitame Rosh Nizro. So we'll say ultimately the Pasuk says only the Nazir who actually becomes Tameh himself is going to have liability. Fine. V'taglachas lo nase megalech kimiskalech kal chor mituma. So we'll say if that's the case, we should say by haircutting. By haircutting. Ultimately, again, the barber should not have the same liability as the Nazir. From a kal v'chomer from Tuma, what's the kal v'chomer? Uma Tuma shiso seres hakol Tuma, which ultimately, again, you lose everything observed up until that point. Yet lo asu ba mitame ki mitame. Ultimately, again, the person who makes the Nazir Tameh does not have the same liability as the Nazir who became Tameh himself. Taglacha she'ino soser ala shloshim yom. Haircutting where you only lose 30 days. Lo kol shekein. Shelo naseh megalech kimiskalech. The barber should not have the same liability as the Nazir. Amakra tar lo yavar al roshel karibeh. Lo yavar hu v'lo yavar la'acher. So we'll say the drasha we make is a razor shall not pass upon his head, which essentially we darshan to say the Nazir can't make the razor pass upon his head, and what? Someone else can't make the razor pass upon his head as well. Incredible. So we'll say there should be no permitted case of haircutting. And remember, there is. For example, in the case where the Nazir becomes of a TORAH as well, but there should be no permitted case of haircutting based on a kal v'chomer from wine. So wine, which does not cause the loss of the entire count, yet there's no permitted case of wine consumption. So again, haircutting, which does cause the Nazir to lose days he observed, certainly there should be no permitted case. Rosho, Zikano. Supposed to remember again, we had this Rasha before. The Torah did not need to say both Rosho and Zikano, his head and his beard. The fact that it went ahead and it said both gives us an extra word for a drasha. That Allah Lamaisa, there is a case where the Nazir is permitted to cut his hair. What's that case? That's the case where he becomes a Masorah. V'taglachas lo tistar klal kal v'chomer miyayin. So we'll say ultimately again. So haircutting should not become there should be no permitted case of haircut. Taglachas lo tistar klal. So haircutting should not cause the Nazir to lose any days observed. Kal v'chomer from wine. Wine, where there's no permitted case, in ososer, yet does not go ahead and cause the Nazir to lose any time. So haircutting, which ultimately again does cause, haircutting, where there is a permitted case, right? I.e. the Mitzorah, certainly again it should not demolish or should not destroy the days observed, to which the Gemara says, Ba'inon gidol seir v'haleka. Now what's by haircutting, it's different. A Nazir cannot conclude his Nazirite vow until when? There's growth. There's growth. The minimum definition of hair growth is 30 days. 30 days. Wine consumption should cause the Nazir to lose 30 days. And should be a kal v'chomer from hair cutting. So we'll say if hair cutting, where there's a permitted case, i.e. Mitzorah, yet again you lose days observed. Wine, where there is no parallel permitted case. Certainly again should cause the Nazir to lose time. So I'll say the only reason why by hair cutting ultimately you lose time is why. I'll say it's just a practical issue because he only conclude his Naziros with hair growth and he doesn't have it. But I will say ultimately again when it comes to wine, the hair is still intact. So we'll say this represents the end of the sugya. So we'll say bottom line, we have some very important takeaways. First of all, reaffirming our three categories of prohibition: grape consumption, any derivative from the grape, hair cutting, and ultimately tumah. The major distinction between these two rabbosai is that in tumah and taglachas, tumah and hair cutting, choter michlalo, there are permitted cases. By tumah, it'll be a case of meis mitzvah. By taglachas, it'll be a case if the Nazir becomes a Mitzorah. This stands in contradistinction to grape consumption, where there is never a permitted case. On the flip side, consumption of grapes or any grape derivatives only results in what? A prohibition, but what? No lost time. Conversely, tumah and taglachas always result in lost time. Taglachas, how much time do you lose? Right? Up until 30 days. Tumah, again, you lose everything observed up until that point. Plus, of course, I will say, by the way, it's not just you have to start again, but remember, it's a delayed start with Tumah. Why is it a delayed start? Because what do you need first? 7 days of Tara. Good. Beautiful, I will say. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Good. Memdalam base. Really coming together. Really coming together. Good. Shabbos and Memdalam base. 44b. Mishnah. Taglachas Tumah. So we'll say, so now we're going to delve a little bit more into the Taglachas. Ultimately, again, the process of hair cutting for Tumah. So we'll say, let's take a breath for just a second. Breath is right. So what do we have? Here's what I know. You have a guy who's a Nazir. Nazir becomes Tameh. How did he become Tameh? We'll say, how did he become Tameh? Whatever, right? By the way, it could be a permitted case of Tumah. Once again, what's permitted case of Tumah? Meis mitzvah. Or just a flagrant act of Tumah. Right? We'll say, again, what's the flagrant act of Tumah? Right? We'll say, by the way, it's interesting, right? It's like in the world of Averis as well. Like the Gemara brings down that Esther and Malka is an example of like an Avera Lishma. Okay, I'm not getting into all details right here. Right? So, right, in the world of Averis, you could have an Avera Lishma, right? Which is like an Avera Lishim mitzvah, an Avera Lishim Avera. In the world of Tumah, you could have Tumah that's a mitzvah, right? And Tumah that's an Avera, right? Which sounds so fascinating. So Tumah that's a mitzvah, that's Meis mitzvah. Tumah that's an Avera, he wanders into a cemetery. Right? So we'll say, so now watch. So again, the reason I'm mentioning this is, for our purposes now, it actually makes no difference. Because bottom line, if you're a Nazir and you became Tameh, whether you became Tameh, right, you became Tumah, you became Tameh because you have a license to become Tameh, i.e. Meis Mitzvah, or you became Tameh because, whatever, you're a sloppy Nazir, right? It was a Labor Day Purim, right? People find themselves in all different kinds of places on Purim. Moshe Dovid, was I out of your sunroof yesterday? Was I standing on? I came home very cold, and I think it was because I was out of your sunroof. Okay, good. Anyway, I was say, right? So Lamaisa, right? People find themselves in all kinds of places. So what happens? Halacha Lamaisa, you have now the Nazir in a cemetery. Either way, I both say, it doesn't matter. In other words, the result is the same. Which is now, there's a process of course, 7 days of purification, right? And then after that, he restarts again. So here it is. Taglachas Tumah Ketzah. So both say the Nazir becomes Tameh. What's his process now for hair cutting and restarting? So here we go. Ketzad. So we'll say, here it is. Ketzad. Haya mazeh b'shlishi u'b'shvi. So we'll say, so first step is, right, sprinkling. Remember, again, he's Tameh. So anytime you're Tameh Tumas Meis, what do you need? Paraduma. When do you get sprinkled para aduma? Days 3 and day 7. So that's step 1, right? Sprinkling of day 3 and day 7. Umigaleach b'shvi. Then I both say again, there's a full hair cutting, right? The full hair cutting on day number 7. Umevi karbanos of b'shmini. And then on day 8, you bring your karbanos. So 7 days of purification. I just want to point out, this piece, the purification piece, is not unique to Nazir. This is general purification piece when it comes to Tumas Meis. So now again, sprinkled with the ashes of Para Aduma, day 3, day 7, and on day number 8, you bring your karbanos. Okay? Then Gilach B'Shmini, now we'll say so again, that's the halacha. Fine. You bet that, so I will say, by the way, if you just take a quick look at the Rush, the Rush says, right in the beginning of the Rush, so you do your hair cutting on day 7 and bring your karbanos on day 8. So we'll say, that's the way the Torah lays it out. So purification process, right? Day 3, day 7 sprinkling, hair cutting day 7, karbanos day 8, you're good to go. Now watch this. I will say, what happens if you delayed the process for whatever the reason, and you didn't do your hair cutting on day 7, instead now you did your hair cutting on day number 8, maybe karbanosov bo bayom. I will say, so in that case, again, halacha l'maisa, you can bring your karbanos the same day as your hair cutting. So in other words, karbanos could always be brought on day number 8 of the process, even if what? Even if you delayed your hair cutting from day 7 to day 8. Fine. So we'll say, now watch this. I'm going to be tired for that. Now that's Rabbi Akiva. I'm going to be tired for Rabbi Tarfon said, Ma bein zeh l'mitzorah Why is this different than Mitzorah? Now we'll say, now watch this. Take a quick look at the Rush again. What's going on by Mitzorah? So the Rush says, Bein zel Mitzorah d'chsev b'parshas Mitzorah b'taglachas beis v'ya b'yom hazayin yigaleach es kol saro v'chi beis b'gadav v'rachas es v'sarah b'mayim v'tier. So we'll say by Mitzorah it says, right there, remember again, hair cutting also occurs on day number 7. And then the Torah says, v'yom ches yavi beis Torim v'kifsa. So we'll say by Mitzorah also, you do your hair cutting day 7, karbanos day 8. Now we'll say, now here's the chat. By Mitzorah, what's the halacha? We're going to show us by Mitzorah, the halacha is, if you delay the hair cutting to day 8, ultimately again, right, you push your karbanos to day 9. To day 9. By Mitzorah, hair cutting and karbanos cannot occur on the same day. So we'll say, so again, let me just point out what's happening over here. In a vacuum, the process for purification from the dead and for tzaras work basically the same way, which is 7 days of purification, right? Day number 7, hair cutting. Day number 8, carbon. Rabbi Akiva says by Nazir, if you delayed your hair cutting to day number 8, you could still bring your karbanos that same day. Rabbi Tarfon says, hey, what's going on over here? By Mitzorah, what's the halacha? If you delay your hair cutting until day number 8, Rabbi will say, what does that do? That delays your karbanos until day number 9. So Rabbi Tarfon is asking Rabbi Akiva, why is Nazir different than Mitzorah? Amrlei, to which Rabbi Akiva says, calm down. I'll tell you, Amrlei, you feel Rabbi Tarfon getting worked up about this. Rabbi Akiva says, take a deep breath. I'll tell you why. Amrlei, zeh tarasa talui b'yamav, v'umitzorah tarasa talui b'taglachaso. Rabbi will say, when it comes to Nazir, the purification process is dependent on days, and by Mitzorah, ultimately again, the purification process is dependent on head shaving. Therefore, ve'einenu mevi karban ela imkin mu'urav shemesh. Rabbi said, as we're going to see, let's work backwards. By Mitzorah, Rabbi said, the halacha is like this: the Mitzorah needs to shave his head, and then needs hair of shemesh, then needs the setting of the sun to bring the karbanos. So therefore, by Mitzorah, Rabbi say, head shaving and karbanos will never happen on the same day. So if you delay, so therefore in a perfect model, you'll do haircut on day 7, bring your karbanos on day 8. But if for some reason you delay haircutting till day number 8, you can't bring karbanos until when? Day number 9. That stands in contradistinction to Nazirus, where halacha l'maisa, ultimately again, everything is dependent on days. So therefore, again, hair cutting has to take place on day number 7, but lamait and karbanos take place on day number 8. But if you delay hair cutting till day number 7, till day number 8, no problem. You could still bring your karbanos. So we'll say here the distinction by Nazirus, the offering up of karbanos is dependent on days. Days. Once you hit day number 8, you can bring your karbanos. By Mitzorah, ultimately again, karbanos are dependent on hair cutting, right? So therefore, again, and hair cutting, your tumah is not finished until sunset after your haircut. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, if you don't produce your haircut until day number 8, you have to wait until day number 9. Full body, it's full body. I'm just calling it taglachas just to keep the terms nice. But Greg's saying, good. Remember, the hair cutting by Mitzorah, of course, is a full body shaving, as opposed to Nazir, which is just the shaving of the head. Correct. We're just using in Gemara, the lashon is taglachas. So just use, but correct. So we'll say, so it says the Gemara, kivlo minei lo. So we'll say, did Rabbi Tarfon accept this explanation from Rabbi Akiva or not? So let's analyze Tashma. The Tani Hillel brings down Gilach b'shmini mevi karbanosa b'chi. So we'll say, what did we learn over here? That if the Nazir went ahead, right, the Nazir who's recovering from his tumah, if he went ahead and he did his hair cutting on day number 8, he brings his karbanos on day number 9. Well, if Rabbi Tarfon really accepted Rabbi Akiva's position, Leisi karbanos b'shmini, then Abba said you should be able to bring your karbanos the same day as your hair cutting. Right? The fact that by Nazir, we're saying that if he delayed his haircut to day 8, he can't bring his karbanos until day 9. That sounds like what's happening over here. We are streamlining Nazirus with tzaras, which sounds like Rabbi Tarfon did not accept Rabbi Akiva's explanation. Rabbi lo kashin. No, it's not a problem. Ha ditaval b'shvi'i, ha delo taval b'shvi'i. Oh, I will say there's a fundamental distinction, right? What's the case? This case, I will say, is talking about where he did not go to the mikvah on day number 7. Okay. Well, if he didn't go to the mikvah on day number 7, then obviously that is going to go ahead and delay the entire TORAH process by a day. And that's why in that case, I will say, if you don't go to the mikvah on day number 7, so halacha l'maaseh, again, you're only going on day number 8. That's going to push everything one additional day, and karbanos can't be brought until day number 9. But in a proper case, where immersion took place in its appointed time, then what? Immersion is day number 7. Ultimately, again, haircutting is day number 7, and karbanos will be day number 8. And even if halacha l'maaseh, you delayed haircutting till day number 8, as long as immersion took place when? On day number 7, ultimately you're good to go. So we'll stop over here for today. Tremendous. Well, I'll say again, I just want to point out what we're going to do in the coming sugim, Yirtzeh Hashem, is get greater clarity. We're going to get greater clarity on the entire process and all the different pieces in the timeline as well. Incredible. Shkoyach. Chevron Zoom. Shushan Purim, everyone.